The quote-unquote miracle drug, also known as GLP-1s or Ozempic, its brand name, swept the world with a solution for weight loss and to fight diabetes. But now, after all that hype, reality has set in, and there have been, of course, some discovered roadblocks. The patents are about to expire, and as we all know, the prices are pretty high. Are healthcare investors fearing that profits might eventually drop to zero? And with elections right around the corner, what are the candidates saying about imposing price caps? We're going to break it all down for you right now on UBS Trending. Hi, everyone, and welcome to UBS Trending. I'm Anthony Pastore. Thank you for joining us. Moritz Pott, who's the founder and CEO of Tema ETF Management, is joining me here in the studio. Moritz, great to have you here. A very timely topic, I would say, of talking about GLP-1s and, of course, the brand names like Wegovy and Ozempic. But nice to have you join me.
Thanks so much for having me on the show today. Look forward to the conversation.
You know, I think one of the things, I was talking to some coworkers right before sitting down with you today, and they kept asking me, when's the price going to come down? Sort of in a joking way, like everybody wants to be on it, but we know that the prices are high, but as you said, coming down. But before we get into the specifics of that and the investor case, there's been a lot happening in the GLP-1 space lately. What are the challenges and some of the risks that you see? Price probably being one of them.
Yeah, so it's a great question. And, you know, if we look at the space today, the biggest challenge is supply. You know, in the world today, there's 1 billion diagnosed obese people, and Novo Nordisk estimates only 3% of those are currently treated. And the challenge has really been, how can we ensure there's enough supply of these drugs? People are already working on pricing, but the problem today is actually not affordability. It's really production before we get to affordability. And it's a space which is moving very fast. Right now, there's 2 approved drugs in the US. The Eli Lilly drug was only approved 7 months ago, or 8 months ago. But looking beyond just what the drugs are, how can we actually improve supply? So we're seeing Novo Nordisk buying a company called Catalent, which is a listed company trying to expand its manufacturing capabilities. We see Eli Lilly opening 2 major plants in the US in the next 12 months. So we think there's going to be a significant ramp up in supply, but the reality is supply is still constrained. And that's why Novo Nordisk is taking a view they only want to offer the drug to people who can actually continue or get access to the supply cycle.
Right.
So the companies are taking different approaches. Pricing is definitely a concern, and the list price is not the actual price. Let's be clear about that. And I think pricing will only come down, but this is a major opportunity. People think about GLP-1s in the context of weight loss. We could talk about it a bit later. We think actually this could expand into other areas beyond weight loss, which opens up a whole market.
Yeah, let's talk about that, because there are more comorbidities besides heart disease, obesity, and diabetes, which diabetes, of course, we know that these drugs were created for diabetic patients who now, as you just mentioned, are having a hard time getting access to the drug, which is a whole other story in and of itself. But talk about that it's not just those common comorbidities that we know about, because it is being discovered for other things.
So the known trifecta between heart disease, diabetes, and obesity is well known and well established. But we're seeing early but pretty promising data that we could use GLP-1 drugs for neurological disorders, potentially even for oncological disorders, but also for other disorders, including sleep apnea. And while there's no approved drugs, and where the trials are still in phase 1 or phase 2, so still quite early stage, the data and the direction of travel is very encouraging. So today we think about just the application from an approved perspective in obviously diabetes and obesity. Heart disease we think is likely next, and there's a number of drugs that are quite advanced. But Alzheimer's is one area of application. Cancer is another area. Sleep apnea is another area. Addiction even. So the use case is starting to expand, but not yet to be approved. And when we think about the world of GLP-1, there's a number of big challenges today. One, we mentioned obviously price, another access, but also injectables. Not everyone wants to inject themselves.
That's right.
So there's a big race, or there's a big challenge, like who could come out with the first pill? And there's really 2 companies who are ahead of that queue. A company called Chugai, which has a relationship with Roche, which also has a partnership with Eli Lilly. And then there's a number of other players like with Viking that are also in the queue. So what are the 3 main challenges we're trying to manage? Is how do we move from injectable to oral? How do we move from weekly to monthly dosage? And how do we think about applications beyond just weight loss, in addition to the supply and pricing constraints which we already mentioned.
Right. Yeah, and that really is the issue, I think, right? I mean, we talk about this from the sense of what's available out there on the market, and you were even saying something like 3%, only 3% of patients who are obese are actually getting access to this.
Correct.
And so, you wonder then, can the pharmaceutical companies start making enough? And if they start buying up other smaller pharmaceutical companies to increase their, ability to have these labs where they can make the drug, that could make a difference. But from the investor perspective, at least right now, the case is one thing. But once more availability comes to market, is there a concern for people who are investing in whether it's the individual pharmaceutical company or some ETF that holds these, that it could eventually reduce profits and then, of course, reduce what the activity is in their portfolio as far as revenues and gains that they're seeing?
Yes, that's a great question. And you're already starting to see people trying to address the supply challenge. So you saw the rise of compound pharmacies, such as Hims, offering GLP-1 drugs. But that, we believe, is a very short-term phenomenon because the weight loss drugs that are approved have actually now been taken off the supply scarcity list. There's a list the FDA maintains of drugs that are deemed to be critical but in short supply. And in those, drugs on that list can be replicated with compound pharmacies. But those drugs have been removed from the list as of last month. So we believe that the compound pharmacy risk short-term is actually not the biggest concern. What we do think is the approval cycles are long. So Eli Lilly, in their latest earnings call last month, they mentioned that their tirzepatide approval cycle was, I think, 8 years. So if you think that we have a number of drugs that are in the pipe, we don't think anything will realistically get approved before 2026, despite the massive unmet need. So I think it's, the reality is that there are patents. So if we look at the patent life, we see a patent expiry in China in 2026. We're less worried about that. China, it's likely they'll have their own way of evolving and playing the GLP-1 space. But in the US and Europe, we see patents extending into 2032 or even later than that. So we are not really worried, given that we think even if some drugs only get approved by 2026, we still think there'll be a healthy patent life. And again, I think the demand is so immense. If we can crack the supply side of the equation and couple it with more fair or better pricing, which is a political issue we can talk about in a minute,
right,
then frankly, we think that this is a big opportunity, even if price halves or even if price goes down by 60, 70%.
So, and you did touch on the election a little bit, or the political side of it, and obviously we are in an election year, and President Biden has been, even though he's not in the race anymore, he has been speaking about drug pricing and making sure that Medicare and Medicaid cover a lot of things like insulin. But this particular arena, these GLP-1s, they're not really covered by insurance. So I would imagine that we're going to hear more and more about this over time, probably from Trump and Harris as we go down the campaign trail to election day. What are your thoughts on this, on the political side?
Yeah, so drug pricing has become a politicized issue. The IRA is a testament to that. The drug companies are actually taking the government to court about the IRA. The IRA did dictate your pricing mechanism, but also negotiation mechanism, for example, for Medicaid. And that included insulin, but that didn't include GLP-1s. So GLP-1s right now are not capped in a way that insulin pricing is capped. We think there's a good chance that over time that could be included in some kind of drug regulation program. We don't think that's a bad thing, because ultimately we want more patients to be able to get access at affordable prices to these drugs. Insurance coverage is still very early stage. There are some plans that cover it, but not many. We're starting to see the expansion of the coverage, but still it's a limited sect. And I think the reality is there's also concern about potential cases of abuse or misuse, which is a concerning given how limited supply is today. So we think looking forward, we think ultimately both parties in the election want to reduce drug pricing. They realize that GLP-1 drug pricing is not covered under the current IRA. I think they realize that supply is a concern, but price is the next concern, and pricing is going to have to come down. But even if pricing is no longer at the list price of $12,000 a year, and now maybe, let's say that's $6,000, we actually think it will go down even further. And if you look at Eli Lilly, they announced last month they're actually going to already reduce the list price for their vials significantly. So we think pricing takes one direction, but we think just given the scale of the opportunity, we don't see that actually as a commercial concern. And we see that the pace of innovation is only accelerating, especially with the profits that they're currently generating.
Right. Mort's Pot, thank you very much for joining us. Good to have you.
Thank you so much for having me on the show today. Really
Of course. Come back soon.
Thank you.
As you said, it's changing all the time. And thank you all for joining us. You can get more information on everything we talked about today, plus other topics out of our Chief Investment Office at ubs.com/views. Plus, you can follow us on all the social media channels like LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. Also, follow us on Instagram at UBS Trending is our account right there. And find content you're not going to find anywhere else. And as always, if you have any questions about your portfolio, make sure you're speaking with a financial advisor. Until next time, I'm Anthony Pastore. Have a great rest of your day. And remember to keep your eyes on what's trending. We'll see you soon, everybody.